The definition of risk assessment says that it is a systematic process to identify, evaluate, and control risk. Correct? Systematic process to identify, evaluate, and control risk. नाउ ज्यादातर लोगों को ये लगता है कि रिस्क असेसमेंट के अंदर हम सिर्फ आइडेंटिफिकेशन का काम करते हैं. नहीं, risk assessment is not only about the identification portion. It is more than that. And what it is more than, when we say that it is more than that, it not only identifies, but it evaluates. It weighs, measure karna hai na hame. So it evaluates. And then once we have evaluated, then we control the risk. रिस्क असेसमेंट कब करना चाहिए, ये बड़ा टिपिकल सवाल आ जाता है कि रिस्क असेसमेंट करना कब चाहिए. तो बेसिकली रिस्क असेसमेंट को लोग ये सोचते हैं दैट रिस्क असेसमेंट इज डन फॉर द एंटायर फैसिलिटी, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं है. रिस्क असेसमेंट कैन बी परफॉर्म फॉर वन सिंगल एक्टिविटी. And when you start doing that risk assessment of that one single activity, what we get to evaluate the things, we get to identify, we get to evaluate, and we get to control the risk. So how will you say that risk is low, or risk has been reducing, or risk is increasing? Because unless you are studying one single activity, you'll not be able to say that, okay, in this particular activity the risk is increasing, in this particular area the risk is increasing. So that all comes to one single point of identified, evaluated, and controlled risk conditions. So this is next is the key characteristics of high hazard industry. So what are the key characteristics? First, high hazard industry. Now you start relating whatever I have explained to you. These are the characteristics. So in a high hazard industry, high energy process is there. Okay, flammable materials are there, and high pressure are there. That is what we were discussing right now. Correct? So if there is high pressure, flammable conditions are there, and if flammable material is there, high pressures is there, the one this is, and high energy processes are there, then this is high hazard industry. Next is if you have complex systems with interdependent components. When we say interdependent complex system means, if this is not closed, it will blast. If this will not close or this will not open, it will have a runaway. If this is not okay, then this will happen. If this is not, so these are all complex systems which have interdependency of the operational functions. Like we add two chemicals, these by adding these two chemicals, there is an exotherm so created. So it has to open the vent, that it has to be vented out. The pressure has to go out. So that is how these interdependencies comes into picture and the complexity of the system exists. Now, imagine first 2 points. In every dam industry, this is there. The third aspect is significant potential of catastrophic incidents. Now, what is catastrophic? Now, surprisingly, the definition of catastrophic is when more than 50 people or more than 100 people are impacted or affected. That is what they say. Even if one person has the process has the potential that one person can die or there can be a fatal one, then it is considered to be catastrophic incident. That is why our what our risk matrix says, one fatal, correct? Yes or no? The last but not the least comes to the strict regulatory and public security. So what we need, public scrutiny is required. Why public scrutiny is required? Because people are aware. Not on site, off site people will be impacted. So that is where if off site people are going to be affected, then it has stricter regulations. Now, based on these parameters, what do you think? Do we have any industry which is not in high hazard industry? Each industry in these parameters, do you see that there exists an industry which is not a high hazard industry? No, there is none. Because these criterias are very clear. What they have done is that because all these manipulations were done by humans, we only want, much more easy way out things. That's why we are just keeping things and letting things go. So that is how these key characteristics play a crucial role to understand that these are critical processes. Chalo. Next is types of risk in high hazard industry. What are the types of risk? So in high hazard industry, there is a process safety risk, the first risk. When we say process safety, means two major example comes into picture. One is equipment failure, and the next is loss of containment. Means we lose the grip over containing the process. It goes haywire. Correct. So here, process, equipment failure, and containment risk. So these are two risks which classify and goes up to type of high hazard industry. The second portion is occupational health risk, that is exposure to toxic substances. So these comes the second point, that is high hazard industries, they have occupational health risk. Now even if you have simplest of the chemical, if there is an exposure to a toxic substance which can pose health risk to an individual, it is occupational health risk. Correct. The third is environmental risk, environmental risk of spillage and emissions. And last but not the least, business continuity risk. If something goes wrong, the entire business will. There are technical risk and there are commercial risk. Both are involved. Correct. So this is what happens in high hazard industry. Next aspect is about your risk assessment framework. So whenever you want to assess we discussed last time that uh, what is the risk management framework that we should use to assess anything. So the framework is very clear. It is divided into basic 5 steps, and these 5 steps are very clear for any type of risk assessment. Correct. So the very first aspect that you need to do in any risk assessment. Now, risk assessment is any activity where you are trying to identify risk, you are trying to categorize the risk, you are trying to, find a way that okay, whether it is acceptable, whether it is not acceptable, or how we can reduce this further. So all that comes under risk assessment. So now risk assessment basically has two categories. One, qualitative. Second, quantitative. Quality. Whenever we say that we want to buy something, we go and check its quality. Correct? How we check its quality? We have our own senses, right? To identify the quality of it. इंडिविजुअल्स के एक्सपीरियंस का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, और इंडिविजुअल्स के एक्सपीरियंस का जब आप इस्तेमाल करते हैं कि भाई somebody हैज मार्क्ड दैट इसका क्वालिटी अच्छा नहीं है, हमने रेटिंग दे दिया कि इस चीज का रेटिंग 1 से 5 के बीच में हमने रेटिंग दिया, ये चीज अच्छी नहीं है, 1 इज बैड, 5 इज गुड, रेटिंग दिया, रेटिंग सिस्टम, 5 स्टार रेटिंग होटल है, 5 स्टार रेटिंग रेस्टोरेंट है, ओके, वी कैन गो देयर. सो व्हाट इज दैट? दैट ऑल is qualitative data, that somebody has categorically divided or categorically identified that okay, this is risky, this is not risky. Somebody, correct, or group of people. So what they have done, they have identified this. Okay, now this is qualitative. But when we say quantitative, quantitative means ah, you are saying that the quality of this is bad. How? What were the ingredients? What was the quality of ingredients? Whether the whether the flame was right, whether the atmosphere where it is being manufactured, or whether that what was the temperature there, what was the time period it was taken to cook. So all that happens. So when you start evaluating and, you know take collecting the data of quantification, quantifiable data, any data that is quantifiable. Quantifiable means that can be measured. What can be measured? Temperature can be measured, pressure can be measured, flow can be measured, correct? So all this data when you collect, and then you say that okay, time is also wanted. So time, pressure, temperature, flow, all these parameters are taken into account, and then we say that okay, we have evaluated each point. So to perform this task, this is the range in which the temperature is supposed to be, but it has been observed that it was not in this range, it has gone above or it has gone below. Like when you do a blood test, what is happening? That's quantitative analysis. So they take out your blood and they do all the ratios and everything. Okay, आपका हीमोग्लोबिन यहाँ से यहाँ पे होना चाहिए था, अभी आपका इतना है, यहाँ से यहाँ होना चाहिए था, इतना है, यहाँ से यहाँ होना चाहिए था, इतना है, correct? So that is quantitative analysis. When you have ranges in front of you, when you know that it is supposed to be in this range and it is not, so quantifiable proportions when measured is called quantitative analysis. Now, has of what if, HERA, or risk assessment, fire load, all this is semi quantitative or qualitative analysis. You can categorize every risk assessment under qualitative category. You can categorize it in quantitative also, depending on what is the approach, how anything is being derived. So that is how we calculate that okay, this is how things are, correct? So the very first step that comes here is hazard identification. Now to identify the hazard, you can use different techniques. You can use what if analysis, you can use why by technique, you can use hazard, you can use SIL, depending on what assessment you are performing, correct? The second step, the first step is hazard identification. The second step is risk analysis. Now, mostly people conduct hazard, but they forget to do the risk analysis. You have identified things, but if you are not analyzing it, you are not categorically dividing, or you are not making a risk matrix. Yeah, okay, we evaluated, we identified that this is wrong, but we have not identified what is the likelihood of this going wrong and what is the severity that can happen. How do we calculate risk? We calculate risk by calculating the likelihood multiplied by severity, correct? What is the likelihood of anything occurring? What is the probability? And multiply by severity. How much severe, correct? So any assessment, the first step is to identify. The second step is to assess it. Now, what we are doing, we are evaluating it. So, the second step of preparing the risk analysis or risk matrix, it gives you the second stage. Okay, we have identified that this activity is going on. According to this activity, this is the risk of this activity happening. So, we have identification, we have evaluation, correct? Now, when we are evaluating it, once we have evaluated, then what we'll say, we have our risk category number or risk matrix is established. So when risk matrix is established, what will happen? We'll see numbers, and those numbers will indicate high, low, medium. Then we say, once we have evaluated the risk, we will categorically divide it into acceptable or unacceptable, correct? Whether we want the risk to go further low, that think of possibilities that how we can reduce this further. So we try and reduce the risk. We cannot eliminate the hazard, we can reduce the risk, correct? So how we'll do that? We will do the fourth step, and that is risk control and mitigation measures. So now once we apply the risk control and mitigation measures, then again you have to go back to the analysis, that okay, now this is the acceptable level that we have achieved. and further we cannot do anything more. The risk can be only this much. This is as low as practically acceptable. Correct? So that is the my acceptable level of risk now we have achieved. So once that is achieved, then the cycle goes to the fifth assessment portion, and that is monitoring and review. Now without the if the report is missing this monitoring and review portion, then also the report is of no use. So hence, any report that you prepare should have all these five steps. First, identification, analysis, evaluation, controls, and monitoring and review. So these are simple five steps that you need to follow. Next is common challenges that we have. So what are the common challenges? We have incomplete hazard identification, biggest issue. Lack of accurate data for analysis, second big issue. Complexity of modeling and interdependent system, तीसरा issue. Human factor and operational deviations, चौथा. And restraint to implementing recommendations, resistance. हर जगह पे होता है ना, कॉमन इश्यूज है. Yes, complete hazard identification means there are certain things that ideally people are supposed to know, but they are not getting to know it because there is some disruption in between. You should know the entire length of the pipeline. You should know how many number of bends are there. You need to know system by system what is the length, how many numbers of wall are there from one point to the next point. From here the material is being taken, from here the material has been delivered. The second point, point 1 material is collected, point 2 material is delivered. In between, what is the length, how much is the how much are the bends, what type of wall, what type of sensors, what type of control functions, what type of detection features, what type of measuring features are available in between should be a list. That is what you call identification. यही accurate data चाहिए. So lack of accurate data is our second concern. That see, wherever you have put a wall, तो वहां तक आपको जाना पड़ेगा ना, एक्सेस करना पड़ेगा ना. वो वाल खुलेगा, उसका सर्विस होगा, उसका मेंटेनेंस होगा. तो ये सब चीजें हम लोग डिजाइन स्टेज पे क्यों नहीं सोचते? सो हियर कम्स योर वन ऑफ द ओल्ड पॉइंट, जो हम लोगों ने डिजाइन बेस्ड सेफ्टी इंटीग्रेशन की बात करी थी, यहाँ पे वो पॉइंट आता है, कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऑफ द मॉडलिंग interdependent system. So there are systems that are interdependent. If this happens, only then this will happen. If this happens, only then that will happen. So these types of interdependency should also be known to you guys. In one company, that is not that only one product is being made. So there can be recipes. So when recipes are there, what you need to do? That you need to understand the range of it. So your system one day is working at 5 kg pressure, the next day it might be working at 10 kg pressure also. Okay? So you need to know that at what range your system is operational, and at what range, for what range the system was designed. Now, human factor and operational deviations. So what are and how human factors and operational deviations occur? हमने हमारे सिस्टम जो है वो टाइम बाउंड प्रोसेस जो है वो एक टाइम बाउंड प्रोसेस होता है. ये नहीं है कि आपके पास में इतना हाईटेक सिस्टम हो कि हर चीज ऑटोमेटिकली चल रही. 99% इंडस्ट्री आज भी मैनुअल फंक्शंस और मैनुअल सिस्टम पे चलती है, क्योंकि उन सिस्टम्स को, क्योंकि आप एक प्रोडक्ट नहीं बनाते, आप द मल्टीपल प्रोडक्ट बनाते हैं, तो हर एक के लिए सारी रेसिपी डालना, ऑटोमेशन करना, ये सारा चीजें अभी डिफिकल्ट है, कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव नहीं है. की कंसर्न्स दैट ह्यूमन फैक्टर्स को कैसे कंट्रोल करोगे? ह्यूमन फैक्टर्स का रिस्क कम नहीं किया जा सकता. ह्यूमन, wherever human is there, risk is there, severity is high, probability is high. So human probability is never low. It is either medium, moderate or high. Human probabilities are always medium, moderate or high. Correct? Wherever, when we say that wherever people are involved in any process, if the process is person dependent or people dependent, then in that case you have to make sure that that deviation, whatever can happen, is being truly accounted for. The evaluation is always high, the risk categorization is always high, on the higher side. Correct. Last point is resistance to implementing and the recommendation. It's quite obvious, that's also part of human factor only. Correct. Because whenever we say that okay, this is dangerous and we want to implement something, then questions come. So that's how the resistance comes into picture. These are common challenges. Now comes the control and mitigation measures. So here, how will we apply the control and mitigation measures? These are applied by the engineering controls. So how this is part of our risk assessment wala portion? Because in risk assessment wala portion, we are also talking about the controls, how we are trying to reduce the risk. So what type of controls are available? Based on that, the risk can be lower. How we can reduce the risk? Furthermore, by engineering control, by administrative control, emergency preparedness, PPs and its use, and regular maintenance and inspection. So these are basic. So here, the most bottom line or the first step is regular maintenance and inspection. So forget about engineering control and everything. That is at the topmost. The very first step is regular maintenance and inspection. You start from here. If this is not done correctly, you will have problems. So this is the first mitigation or control measure that you need to look into, that whether the maintenance is happening properly or not, whether the inspections are happening properly or not, whether the inspection records are proper or not, whether the maintenance record are evident and proper or not. I hope I was able to cover the risk assessment portion today. एंड रिपोर्ट राइटिंग के लिए भी आप लोगों को काफ़ी हद तक इंफॉर्मेशन मिल गई होगी. हम लोगों ने क्वालिटेटिव क्वांटिटेटिव दोनों डिस्कस किया, सेमी क्वांटिटेटिव डिस्कस किया, किस तरह से स्टेप्स होते हैं वो मैंने आपको बताया. जो एक बुक का सीक्वेंस होता है उसी वही आपका सीक्वेंस होना चाहिए कि स्टोरी जो है वो प्रोग्रेसिवली नरेट होनी चाहिए. सो वेन एवर यू आर राइटिंग अ रिपोर्ट, द स्टोरी हैज टू बी नरेटेड प्रोग्रेसिवली. लाइक वी हैव टेकन दिस इंफॉर्मेशन, साइड इंफॉर्मेशन, ये डेटा कलेक्ट किया, वो डेटा कलेक्ट किया, उसका ये हम लोग को मिला, फिर ये मिला, फिर ये मिला, फिर हमने ये एक्शन किया, फिर हमारा ये रिजल्ट आया. सो द नरेशन हैज टू बी वेरी क्लियर इन अ सीक्वेंशियल स्टेप फेज मैनर. Correct. This is what gives you the correct insight or the correct input for the report so generate.